You know, I'm convinced at this point in time that the state of California is just messing with us, because a little while ago we may have talked about it on this channel. I definitely talked about it on Twitter. There was all this stuff coming out from the left wing about how Amber Alerts, the alerts that tell you about missing children, are actually a product of evil white racism. There's a bunch of evil white racists, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but guess what? That's racism, and we don't care enough about the black children. Well, now in the state of California, they have created a new category of alert. This is called the Ebony Alert, and this is meant to tell you when the child that is missing is black, so that way you can care harder about the black missing children in the state of California. Now, we're going to talk about this. I'm going to give you an actual, maybe even a bit of a nuanced take on this particular issue, now that I've done a deep dive into the law, what the alert's actually going to be, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be surprised by my analysis. But before we get into that, thank you to everybody who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
Now, new tonight, Governor Newsom signed a law that can help track down young people of color who have disappeared. Tonight, we're getting answers on how the new Ebony Alerts will work and who can benefit from them.
So, of course, unsurprisingly, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California and complete and total creep, signed this into law without hesitation. Now, weirdly, the local news is reporting this as a broad person of color category. However, it is clear from the author of the legislation and from the advocates for the legislation that this is solely about black children, black young people being missing and them requiring their own alert. Because apparently, again, as I said in the open, the Amber Alert is just evil white racism. Now, for you guys to understand, the Amber Alert is supposed to give you a notification on your phone, on your device, over the radio, that a child is missing, potentially in your area, so you can keep a lookout for that potential missing child. How this is racist, they never really say. They just claim it, and then they pass the law, so I guess you're just supposed to assume that it is true, but I am quite skeptical of this assertion. I don't believe it. I think it's made up, because it typically comes from people on the left wing who are really good at making stuff up.
Amber Alerts have been around for 2 decades, and since that time, more than 370 children and at-risk individuals have been located.
Now, by the way, I don't know if 376 children is anything to write home about. It seems like very few in a state as large as the state of California, especially when you go down the rabbit hole in looking into how many children are missing. However, I will say this might be the children that have had Amber Alerts issued, and they were located because of somebody who saw the Amber Alert, so there might be many more children who were alerted that were not directly tied to their recovery anyway to the Amber Alert. But I also want you to notice that on this board behind this woman, there are plenty of black children in this group of kids that were recovered. So the idea, again, that the Amber Alert somehow leaves behind the black children's, I don't, again, see any evidence for. In fact, they're inadvertently presenting evidence to the opposite in this segment that is unambiguously pro-Ebony Alert.
Time is of the essence when it comes to an actual alert.
So they go to the cop right here, and he says time is of the essence when you have a missing child, which, by the way, I think is true. I think your chances go down significantly after 48 hours, after 72 hours of a child being missing, of being able to recover that child unharmed. So I understand this position being put forward, although they cut him off before he was going to say anything as a follow-up. And this would lead me to wonder if it is really productive at the time that you're forming this alert to make sure the child is black, so you could issue the ultra special Ebony Alert in order to compensate for the fact that time is of the essence and we have to fight back against evil white racism, because allegedly some people are saying that black children's are often very much overlooked, despite the fact that we showed you a chart with plenty of black children's that were recovered through the Amber Alert system.
But some critics say African Americans are often overlooked by the notification system.
You see the difference of when white girls go missing and black girls go missing. The sense of urgency is not there.
So this is where we can get into a bit of an interesting conversation. If we assume the premise is true, that people are less likely to care about black girls as opposed to white girls going missing in the state of California, then would it really make sense to specifically separate out into a different category girls that are cared about less so that people can more easily ignore the Amber Alert? Now, by the way, I completely and 100% reject the notion that people are getting these alerts on their phone, they're looking for the racial description. When they find out it's a black girl, they then block the Amber Alert notifications from their phone or ignore it or whatever. What seems to be more likely to me, if anything is leading to a disparity in these girls being recovered, is the fact that they happen to live in black neighborhoods, because most people live in neighborhoods that are similar to them ethnically, and those people in those black neighborhoods must be less likely to call in tips or respond based on reports of missing children from within their own communities. That would seem like a more likely and logical explanation, but okay, if you say so, we're just gonna roll with it going forward throughout the rest of this segment, and I will put forward again the proposition that if apparently people are being racist against black girls going missing, maybe it doesn't actually make sense to specifically tell them information they're more likely to ignore.
African Americans, whether they're children or young adults, are often listed as runaways.
Again, this is an absolutely terrible segment put together by CBS Sacramento, because we have no idea why specifically black kids are being listed more likely as runaways, and it would be interesting if you were a news agency if you could look into the fact that maybe they happen to run away more or disproportionately at higher rates than white children, than Hispanic children, than Asian children, and thus that explains the difference in classification. But instead, like we see all too often when it comes to any conversation related to racial disparity in this country, just stating the disparity is sufficient enough to declare racism and then to make changes based on that faulty assumption. My friend Devin Tracy calls this the racism of the gaps argument. It's just the God of the gaps argument, but with racism. And this would be a perfect example of this. And the fact that CBS Sacramento completely decided to punt on challenging them on this will lead us to not know if this is actually true.
State Senator Stephen Bradford is the author of a new law that creates Ebony alerts for a community disproportionately impacted by missing youth.
African American young individuals make up almost 40% of those individuals who come up missing.
Now again, 40% on its own superficially seems quite dramatic. It seems like there is a significant problem in the black community. However, it's just stated without any additional context, and we know that black Americans have a lot higher percentages of certain negative categories in this country, negative outcomes, so take it into that context, it might not actually be that dramatic. On top of that, we are well aware of the fact that the black population, or at least you should be, is younger than the white population on average. The median age is about 20 years lower in this country. So it could be more likely that black kids go missing as kids and as teenagers because disproportionately black people tend to be more teenagers and more kids. That could be a possibility that factors in. It's never put in its proper context in this segment. It's just asserted as a disparity, and therefore there must be some racism behind the corner. Look out for it. It may be coming after you, even though we don't have the information to assert that as a fact.
It's going to put significant change in how we react.
Barry Axios with Voice of the Youth says many young women who vanish end up being victims of sex trafficking.
Here in Sacramento, especially, a lot of our girls get exploited.
Now look, I'm not going to dispute the fact that black girls might be more likely to be sold in human trafficking or sex trafficking or anything of the sort. Chances are, just like other negative outcomes we see within that population in our country, this would be disproportionately higher. However, one of the problems with a term like trafficking is that it's intentionally vague to include a lot of things that aren't really what we're talking about. It's very similar to the term sex work, which somehow includes doing adult videos, random webcam work, OnlyFans stuff. Also, it includes stripping, but also it includes prostitution, and those are 5 different distinct lines of work that really should not be grouped together, but it's all to avoid specifically labeling what we're talking about. So while there might be some significant instances of girls being forced into prostitution, the reality is just because we label everything that involves somebody under the age of 18 participating in prostitution and sex trafficking, that doesn't necessarily necessarily mean that they're all being trafficked. There is a such thing as underage prostitutes, and the idea that we just make a broader blanket term for it, and therefore we can just label it under that, really obfuscates the issue and takes away from the fact that there are people being forced into this, and there are people, due to their circumstances, whatever the reason you might want to say, who voluntarily go into this as 16-year-olds, as 17-year-olds, and they should not be put in the same category. By the way, a very notable instance of this was the Cyntoia Brown case, who ran away to be a prostitute at age 16, ended up murdering one of the Johns in cold blood, but then, because they came up with a new term that included her, claimed that she was the victim of sex trafficking in order to mitigate her cold-blooded murder.
In addition to Amber Alerts, California also has Blue Alerts for suspects who attack a law enforcement officer, Silver Alerts for missing seniors and people with disabilities, and Feather Alerts for missing Indigenous people.
So we have about 4 different categories of alerts that are going on already in the state of California, and for the most part, I actually agree with most of these, although the one I would probably be in the most dispute of is the Blue Alert, which is for suspects that attack law enforcement. If you have a suspect on the run, you should put out a specific alert for a suspect on the run. It doesn't matter to me whether they attack a civilian or not. But the closest one to this would appear to be the Feather Alert, which, by the way, when they were proposing developing one of these alerts for Italians, they were actually going to go with a pizza alert, and when they were going to do it for the French, they were going to go with a baguette alert, but they decided to go with Feather Alert because for some reason they wanted it to be as stereotypical and as weird as possible. But this one actually makes more sense than the Ebony Alert that we're talking about, and this is because natives often live on reservations, more separated out from the general population, so an alert that is targeted to that separated out portion of the population, I actually think makes a lot more sense than a Ebony Alert that is specifically aligned for black people that are missing in areas that are not necessarily exclusive to black people. So even though that one's the most similar, there actually is a logical reason for it, and I'm open to the idea that there is an argument for the Ebony Alert if you can actually substantially prove that case, but nobody's actually presenting evidence for this. They're just making assertions, and I just drew you a fine distinction between the Ebony Alert and the Native American one based on the distinctions between how those people are set up, their neighborhoods, reservations versus neighborhoods, and all of that.
So how is an Ebony Alert different?
Expanding the age from 12 to 25, because right now, a Amber Alert is for 17 years or younger.
Black youth considered at risk or with mental or physical challenges will qualify.
With this, the attention, the need, the urgency, I feel will be met, and it's going to be a game changer.
Now, isn't that interesting? The big distinction in this particular alert is that it's expanded all the way to 25, and it includes at-risk black youth, whatever that means, and the examples that they give are potential mental issues or whatever, which leads me to believe that maybe the state of California, if they wanted to expand the alert system in this way, should have done that with the Amber Alert for people under the age of 25, and maybe they should come up with a new alert category, not just for black people, but for people in mental distress, or incorporate that somehow in the Amber Alert. You're giving out too many different delineations, it's completely unnecessary, and again, they have not substantially proved their case at all they did was assert some disparities. Now look, I don't want to be knee-jerk against this. Sure, we're seeing pieces of legislation that prioritize black Americans over other Americans in the name of racial equity, but if they had a good case, I would be able to listen and actually acknowledge that, but they haven't presented that actually in this video. If you guys have a good argument for it, I'm open to it. Leave it in the comments below. But as usual, if you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the new Ebony Alert in the state of California. Till next time.